Hi everyone, Teddy Baldessar, and in this video, we're gonna be answering some of your questions I asked on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube community, Instagram. What are some questions you have for me? Today, we're gonna be answering those questions. First question asks, what was the watch that got you into watches? This is not a straightforward answer because like anything, it's not just one aspect of the journey that starts the journey, in my opinion, especially when it comes to watches, because it was phases for me that allowed me to get into this deeper and deeper, and it wasn't just a linear path in how I connected the dots. I would say some of the early watches were things like a Timex Weekender that I had in college because I couldn't really afford anything else. Some of the early Seiko models like an SKX, those were right there at the beginning. But I think the watch where it started to turn the corner and solidified myself and being more of a collector, I would say, is when I started to spend a little bit more money. Not to say that that's where you become a legitimate collector, but there was almost like no turning back after this. And I remember the moment of buying this watch, and then there was another moment where I was able to get a watch that was owned by my great-grandfather. But the watch that I acquired that really got things going was Junghans, with the Junghans Max Bill. I went for the chronoscope version, which technically is not a true Max Bill design. It uses the Max Bill elements, but that was a later creation after Max Bill's involvement with the brand. But there was just something about the approach of that dial, the typography, the layout, the curvature, the history that goes along with the wall clock, and then taking that into a wristwatch design. It just spoke to me, and I've always found that Junghans, like that watch, probably gets more compliments still to this day than any other watch in my collection. I think part of the reason was the same reason why it spoke to me in the beginning. You don't even need to be a watch enthusiast to appreciate good design, and that is a watch that is amazing at understanding the pillars of design, space, typography, fusing it together, and that was a watch that just spoke to me. And after spending over $1,000 on a watch for the first time, I just remembered that was a big moment for me. Another watch I'd mention is my great-grandfather's Wittenauer. It's a vintage watch, and that sealed the deal when it came to being into watches for the rest of my life. But I would say the one watch that probably did it the most was the Junghans Max Bill design. Next question asks, if you had to choose between German, Swiss, or Japanese watches for the rest of your life, what's your choice? I would say it depends on how much money I want to spend. All of these nations, I would say, are the big three that I would consider when classifying watchmaking, mechanical watchmaking specifically. This is how I'd break it down. Under, say, $1,000 to even maybe $2,000, I would go Japan all day. That is not dismissing what Grand Seiko is doing, Crador is doing, and some of the independent scene. It's strong in Japan. There is just not as much variety at the high end when it comes to brands that are of that stature compared to Germany, as well as especially Switzerland. There are just way more brands that represent that luxury tier. But if you're gonna go under $2,000, Japan absolutely dominates. So that's probably where I would go at that price range. If I'm going in that $2,000 to $4,000 price range, and I'm thinking about diversity here. I'm not looking at just one brand. I'm thinking about everything the nation has to offer. But if I was really comfortable with that $2,000 to $4,000 price range, I would go with the Germans. You have Zinn, you have Nomos, you have Junghans, Tutima, Damasco, Hanhart. And yes, you have Glashütte Regenau way above, you have Lange way above, and some great independents out of Germany that will be more expensive, but that $2,000 to $4,000 range, remarkable value. And I forgot to even mention like Laco, Stova, some of these pilot watches to go along with the ones that I mentioned previously. But if I was gonna spend $4,000 or more on a watch and I had to pick one nation, I would go Switzerland all day. Switzerland allows you to have the most optionality when it comes to luxury brands. Just think about it. Tudor, you have Longines, you have Tag Heuer, Omega, Rolex, Breitling, IWC. Then you get up and get into some more artisanal watchmaking. You have JLC, Patek Philippe, AP, Vacheron, Breguet, Blancpain, Zenith. There are so many brands that you can think of when it comes to this luxury tier. And then I'm not even scratching the surface when it comes to independence, which is a hotbed in Switzerland. That does extend to other parts of the world too. When you're speaking of independence, that's where you can start to see production actually happen because it's not so reliant on large manufacturing capacity. But if I was going to break it down in the simplest form, probably that would be the way that I would look at it. Based on price, I would go Switzerland on the higher end just because of the options, Germany with that weird sweet spot of $2,000 to $4,000, and then under $2,000, Japan all day. So we discussed these big three brands from these different nations. What about a brand from Italy that just made it on teddybaldessar.com? We're very excited about it, Animatic. So Animatic is a smaller boutique brand with an unmistakable design style, finding attractive ways to reduce clutter on its dials and bezels while still retaining function. They source movements from Switzerland, Japan, with some pretty compelling points of value, with the majority of the range falling under $1,000. The collection on the site was hand curated by myself, so you have some classic pieces to look at from the brand, including their U1 and their U2. These are pillars of their design style and really set the standard for them going forward. You also have the U1S that features a Swiss Salida caliber on the inside and some eye-catching lume. And then also a new lineup of tool pieces such as the UT1 and the UT4. If you're liking what you're seeing from Animatic, check them out on teddybaldessar.com. Eric asks, why the hate for Apple Watches? In the industry, not necessarily you. Short answer is they are seen as a threat. And for some brands, they absolutely are a threat. I would say for affordable brands, more for the quartz production side of things, under $500, the Apple Watch is taking market share. You had more Apple Watches being sold last year than all the entire Swiss watch industry combined when it comes to watchmaking. So it is making an impact, no doubt about it. But it's a little bit this weird game, and I do think that you have to, if you're a luxury brand or a collector of watches, appreciate somewhat of what the Apple Watch is doing. It's getting people comfortable with wearing watches on their wrist. You see younger people being able to get into a mechanical watch, and the question is why? There has to be a reason why, and I would think many people have started with an Apple Watch and have started to think about, how can I differentiate? What does it mean to wear a watch? What are other watches out there for me? And then they stumble on this world of mechanical watches and this hobby, and it allows things to take off from there. So I do think it is a gateway for people getting into the watch collecting hobby. I even looked recently at Mark Zuckerberg. He's wearing a Debethune Starry Varius, and this is a guy that's pushing forward technology. I mean, I'm bringing that up just partially because it's showing that these two ideas can coexist. You can also look at technology, and you can look at mechanical watchmaking as two independent ideas that can exist in tandem with one another. And let's not put down the Apple Watch. It is a phenomenal piece of tech, but it is different than the romantic value of a mechanical watch, but some people just struggle with understanding that these two ideas can exist. I think another reason why people are hard on the Apple Watch is that it's so ubiquitous. You see it everywhere. If you look at somebody's wrist and they're wearing something on their wrist, chances are it's an Apple Watch. So seeing it over and over again creates some fatigue, and it makes it easy to want to hate on something like that. The Apple Watch does have an impact on the industry, and I think many people are defensive about their hobbies. When you have a hobby, sometimes that becomes part of your identity, and if there is an object that directly opposes and may be seen as a threat to your hobby, that is also a threat in some people's minds to their identity. So they go very hard against something like an Apple Watch. I know it is crazy to say something like this, but that is how I would rationalize the hate towards the Apple Watch. My opinion, I think it's great that it exists. It is a different proposition for somebody. I have no reason why I would put down an Apple Watch. I've owned an Apple Watch in the past. I don't really use it nowadays, but still, I do think it makes sense that an Apple Watch exists. There are many people out there that I know have gotten into watches because of the Apple Watch. Next question asks, as a new collector, should I buy cheap or wait to buy the big aspirational watch? This is a question I have addressed, I believe, in other videos in the past, but I think it's a complicated question to answer. Now, my personal opinion on things is that you should always go for the best watch that you feel comfortable affording, but you also love. Sometimes though, the watch that is more affordable is the watch that you ultimately want. But what I do not recommend is if you are going for an alternative to a watch that you truly love that is still in reach, if you just were a bit more patient, never go for that cheaper alternative because it will never scratch the itch of going for the watch that you truly love if it is a little more expensive. Now, do not set yourself up for financial burden by going for a watch that's maybe beyond your means. That is not something that I am saying. Buy a watch that you can comfortably afford. But I'm a believer that shortcuts in life are technically really not even real. I'm always trying to delay instant gratification in my life. And I find as a collector, it's very important to remind yourself of this idea. One final point that I'll bring up though when talking about this is, one of the most important aspects of my journey was buying some watches that were more affordable in the beginning, maybe seen as cheaper, and allowing myself to get a taste of what I like, what my preferences are, and that allowed me to be a better collector in the long run. It, of course, is great if you can just knock it out of the park and know exactly what you want right from the beginning, but that is probably not a realistic scenario for most people. You have to learn, you have to experience watches. So sometimes those first acquisitions, no matter what you spend, are not going to be the right picks, regardless. The mistakes that I made in the beginning allowed me to better be equipped to spend money on watches in the future. So yes, you could jump the line and say, I'm gonna spend the most amount of money I possibly can, but a lot of the learning happens when you do make these mistakes. So that's how I would recommend navigating this issue. It's the pros and cons of these two ideas. Know that you're going to probably have to learn regardless. Find a budget that you're comfortable with and just move slow. That's how I would say you have to navigate this whole idea. Next question asks, with the latest collab between Moser and Studio Underdog, do you see any possible scenario where more conservative established brands would incorporate this relatively evolved marketing strategy? Could we be witnessing a start of something new in the industry? One thing I would say though is I wouldn't call Moser a conservative brand compared to the traditional norms of luxury brands in Switzerland. They've always had this approachable, lighthearted, playful nature to them. If you know the Milan family, I think their success, this is a big reason for their success. They release something like the Swiss Alps watch. It looks like an Apple Watch. They release a watch made of cheese. They have a lot of fun with their designs. And I think that's important and allowed this actually to be a pretty no-brainer type of scenario where these brands could collaborate. Richard from Studio Underdog, I've never really spoken to the gentleman there, but he seems like a really funny guy, doesn't take himself too seriously, and you see that with his design and his products, and that's why they've taken off. The name is also amazing and what he's been able to develop with his brand. So this collab to me makes a ton of sense. Like the ethos behind both of these brands, yes, the prices are so drastically different, but the ideas behind the brands feel in some ways like there's a lot of overlap. But do I think we're going to be seeing more of this? This is, to me, something where I think is very important when we talk about how do we allow watches, mechanical watches, luxury watches, to be at the forefront and be a point that somebody might aspire to own. How do you do that? To me, you have to go where people that maybe are not aware of your product maybe one day will. In this case, this is two independent brands that are collabing with one another. I think there were other reasons why this happened, but I could totally see there being more of this cross-functional collab where two products, they don't even necessarily need to be watches, but they can come together to allow people to be more aware of this luxury segment of watches. And I think this is very important for brands. That's why I always love the Omega Swatch collaboration. But you see this all the time in the luxury space, luxury goods, which is not something I spend a lot of time just looking at other than watches, but you hear about a design and fashion house working with a more entry-level product. I know like Birkenstocks did some collaborations in the past. So you see this happening elsewhere, and the reason for doing that is to try to get people aware of your brand without lowering the bar of what your brand needs to represent. There are these tasteful ways to do this, and if I had to predict, I think we will be seeing more of this in the future. Next question asks, is there room for other watch YouTubers in the community? Short answer, absolutely yes, and we've seen what's happened in the last several years. More channels are popping up as watch collecting has become even larger than it was, I would say, even a decade ago, which is strange to say, but like the enthusiast community is tighter knit now than maybe it's ever been, and the size of it has expanded quite beyond what we were used to in years prior, partially just because of what the internet has provided. And I think YouTube is just one of these hubs where people can come together, have fun, and learn about watches in a cool media format that makes a lot of sense and shows off the product in a unique way. For myself, I'm a huge believer that we are better and stronger with more numbers. I like the diverse opinions in the watch community. I like that there's more channels out there. That's why I always do at the end of the year, and I basically reach out to every channel and at least try to get them to partake in the year recap where we talk about what's the most worn watch. I like that aspect, and I think there's enough content out there, there's enough audience, there's enough of understanding that sometimes you might want to watch me. Some people might hate my guts. I mean, they might not, and they want to watch somebody else. And that's fine with me because my main mission with this is to expand the hobby, talk about something that I love. I've been able to carve out a cool lane for myself to be able to do something that I love to do on a day-to-day basis. So I am very happy with that. And more people talking about watches is good for me, it's good for the industry, and I think we absolutely have more room. So if you are somebody that's on the fence, maybe thinking about posting about your watch collection, do it, put yourself out there. I remember thinking to myself too, when I first posted a video, it's almost like shutting off my brain, stop thinking about what other people were thinking, and just talk about something that I was interested in, and just let it go from there. And that's something that I believe in. I believe that the industry is better with more people, and that's something that I always like to do, collab with people and think about how we can come together around the community. Next question asks, should Grand Seiko level up its bracelets and why haven't they already? So I will give you a short answer and I think they should. Now I will also mention that I do think some of the hate is overblown and I think it's done because of a couple reasons. One is that so much of Grand Seiko is over-engineered. They're all about just going the extra mile, and I would argue that their bracelets compared to the other things that they're doing in the presentation of their product is slightly behind, but you're also going up head to head with, think about the competition. You're talking about Rolex, you're talking about Omega, Tudor, some of the best bracelet providers in the entire market. I would also mention that when you're looking at the Grand Seiko bracelets, really what people are talking about is mostly the clasp in some of the butterfly orientation with the 2-button release. That's, I think, where most people are talking about the brand and having some on-the-fly adjustment. I would throw out there that it is difficult to have a seamless integration of on-the-fly adjustment with a clasp of that style. But I personally think that Grand Seiko bracelets are pretty comfortable. I think they're actually right on par with some of the other brands out there in terms of comfort and what they're doing from an execution standpoint for most of the links and how they're finished. The only aspect that I think most people can call out is that the clasp might be able to have a bit more on-the-fly flexibility and maybe feel a bit more premium compared to some of the competition. Another thing I'll call out, and I think this is something that maybe isn't talked about, but I think a reason why people have this reaction to Grand Seiko bracelets is because of titanium. Think about this in the industry. Where else do you think people are first confronted with a titanium bracelet in its weight? And there's this feeling around titanium and just weight in a watch. Remember like the first reaction you had to putting on a mechanical watch for the first time, you felt like the weight, and weight was seen as something as a quality standard. If it's something that's heavier, it's better quality, which is, we know now is not necessarily the case, but with people being able to wear a titanium bracelet, what is the first brand that you commonly will see in the luxury segment that offers a full titanium case and bracelet and has that lightweight feel? Grand Seiko is right there. So I think that is a reason why some people have this reaction. They're just not familiar with titanium cases and bracelet and how that feels. Now, all of this to say is it sounds like there is actually something coming down the line. Mr. Naito, he is the head of the Seiko Watch Corporation. He said in a comment, I believe on Facebook or on LinkedIn, I think on LinkedIn actually, saying that they are coming. Very just nondescript response. So the fact that Mr. Naito is jumping in saying that something is coming is a pretty big deal and tells me that it is actually going to be true. That said, I have absolutely no insight into when it is coming. It could be years because you know Grand Seiko, if they're going to do this, they're going to do it right. Next question, I cannot wear black dial watches if I have brown shoes. Is it that serious, Dr. Baldessar? No, it is not that serious. I talked about matching leathers in the past. Watch dials, to me, you have so much flexibility. I see this as an open playing field, and jewelry is almost an extension of, I think, the outfit. I think where you're mostly going to see some clashing is where you get out of the conventional dial colors. Your blacks, your silvers, your navies, those can basically work with just about any outfit. You don't have to worry about that at all. But say you're going for a different strap, maybe a NATO, maybe a rubber strap, that's where you start to have to think, I think, a bit more about how is this going to work with the whole ensemble? Does it make more sense? That's where you'll see some, from a design perspective, maybe a bit more of this idea of clashing. A Doxa Sub 300 with that professional orange dial might not look great with a suit. So I think we can all use our best judgment, but don't be so rigid with this stuff. It's about being able to express yourself to a degree, find that balance, whatever works for you. What is your philosophy for design, your personal style, and let that be what your standard is. And this next question asks, what do I think of the white dial Seamaster Diver 300 meter? This watch is probably my favorite from the conventional line of Seamaster Diver 300 meters for my own personal taste. And it's also interesting that this seems to be the best-selling model since we've opened up with Omega, just as an anecdote. So a lot of other people seem to like this. But very close by is also the blue, the black, the green. It's pretty widespread. Like, this collection is very strong across the board, but I very much like this design. Black bezel, white dial. The white dial also with the wave pattern is a bit more understated compared to some of the other dial colors. I'm also a huge fan of the green dial. That's one of my favorite configurations, probably my second favorite from this entire collection. But I think that white dial is probably the most versatile. It also differentiates quite a bit from the Bond affiliation, so it stands alone as its own watch. For myself, this is probably the most complete watch in setting a standard for around $6,000 for retail pricing. And that is just not my sentiment only. It seems that that was also something that was shared by many of you that were involved with our tournament and trying to pick the best watch for $6,000. That watch ran away with the tournament, winning every single round very easily. So my opinion, absolutely love that watch. But all right, guys, that's all we have this video looking at this Q&A. If you want to partake in future Q&As, be sure to be following on Instagram, check out the YouTube community, as well as follow on Twitter and Facebook. We'll put a prompt up one day and you can ask your questions right in the comments below. Also, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon. Really do appreciate that, as it does help out the channel. Also check out teddybaldessar.com. teddybaldessar.com is an authorized dealer of over 30 brands. Every watch from teddybaldessar.com comes with quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. Also, if you have any questions about the watches we have on our site, reach out to our team on live chat. We have watch enthusiasts and experts that are ready to answer your questions all throughout the day. Reach out right now if you have a question about something on our site. We'd be happy to help you out. Also, any purchase helps support the content on this channel, allows us to keep doing what we're doing here, and we love what we do. Guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.